I spend every day, almost every hour of my life now, trying to figure out how do I help to wake America up and say we are better than this.
This president believes he is above the law, beyond accountability. And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law. And I would just say to people watching here at home and around the world, in the words of my great colleague, we are better than that. Adjourned.
Chairman Adam Schiff in his closing statement yesterday echoing a comment, a familiar one from the late Elijah Cummings. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Friday, November 22nd. I'm Willie Geist. Joe and Mika have the morning off. With us, Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst Susan Del Percio, White House reporter for the Associated Press Jonathan Lemire, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of The Washington Post and MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson, MSNBC political analyst, former chairman of the Republican National Committee Michael Steele, Vice President for Third Way's National Security Program and an MSNBC contributor, Mika Oyang, and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He's Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. Good morning to you all. Before we get into some of the testimony yesterday from Fiona Hill and David Holmes, Jonathan Lemire, let me just get a big picture for you. We're at the end of these extraordinary 2 weeks. How's the White House genuinely feeling about where they are heading into Thanksgiving?
Well, first of all, I think we should note just indeed how historic this is.
Yeah.
This is the impeachment proceedings, only the fourth time ever against a sitting president of the United States. And we shouldn't lose sight of that, even if things are rapidly moving into very sort of partisan camps here. We have now had 2 weeks. We've had 5 days of testimony, I believe, a parade of witnesses, almost all career officials and diplomats who painted a really extraordinary picture of what had transpired this past year between the President of the United States and the situation in Ukraine, where he has, and there's very little ability to dispute the evidence that he pushed Ukraine to hold investigations into a political rival in order to receive military funding and eventually a White House visit. He, an ally, an important ally for the United States in the West and Europe as a bulwark against Russia, who he had let twist in the wind, and lives were lost because of this decision. Eventually, that aid was released. We know that. Fiona Hill yesterday, in an extraordinary testimony, showed just exactly the parallel paths there. There was the regular path of U.S. foreign policy, and this, as she put it, the domestic political errand, what Rudy Giuliani, the president, were doing to try to get this information about Joe Biden. At the end of these 2 weeks, the White House certainly shaken by the events. They still feel confident that the Republicans in the Senate have the president's back. They do not believe he is really in any risk of losing office. Of course, things can change. We will see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks. But this much is all but certain. President Donald Trump is going to be impeached. He's likely not going to be removed from office, but he is going to be impeached.
And Gene Robinson, we saw again yesterday in Fiona Hill, a career diplomat, someone who worked until July for Donald Trump.
Yes.
Worked in the White House
for 2.5 years.
For 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Come out and tell the truth about what she saw. She was careful not to appear partisan. She did talk to the Republicans about some of the conspiracy theories they've been floating and say, I study this for a living. None of what you're saying about Ukraine meddling in the 2016 campaign is true. She went out and she told the truth, and now, as Jonathan says, it'll be up to the House and then eventually the Senate and the American public to decide, based on what they've heard for 2 weeks, whether or not Donald Trump did something worthy of impeachment.
Yes, you know, first you see why the Democrats scheduled Fiona Hill as kind of the cleanup witness. Yeah. I mean, she was extraordinary, the way she, in a very cool way, sort of told us so much about what had happened, so much about herself, why she does what she does. She gave us a sense of why these career people serve the country the way they do, and how it felt to them to see foreign policy diverted by a president in this way, the consequences of that for Ukraine, the consequences of that for her sense and the sense of others of what was right, what was acceptable, what was proper, what was the way the White House is supposed to work, and you know, you mentioned the American people. I mean, ultimately, if the needle is going to move from where it is now, which is that the president will be impeached, I agree with Jonathan on that. I believe he will be. I believe the impeachment is almost analogous to an indictment, and I think there's plenty of of evidence for an indictment right now. But he is unlikely to be removed from office unless, number one, public sentiment moves in that direction, which the Republican senators will be paying attention to. And number two, we're just going to have to see how this trial plays out. Yeah. What are going to be the rules? We have so few precedents for this. There are obvious witnesses who did not testify, basically because the White House told them not to testify. So will it be a trial in which the defendant, in effect, gets to decide who testifies or not? Is that acceptable to Chief Justice John Roberts, who's going to be presiding at the trial? So a lot of questions going into this next phase, and I assume there will be a next phase.
And before we even get to that phase, will Chairman Schiff and the Democrats pursue some of these potential witnesses like John Bolton, like Mick Mulvaney, like Mike Pompeo, or do they want to get this to a vote and not wait for the courts?
And we also have to note that there's not been official word that they're done.
Right.
I mean, there's going to be Thanksgiving week, but it's not entirely clear that they're finished with this phase.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.